So first big question, what does cyber insurance actually cover?
Oh man, that's a great lead-in. So there's kind of two sides of insurance. There's the first party coverage, which is stuff like you know if you have a event or a breach, there's a whole forensic suite that has to happen. I'm sure Dan is familiar with that process. There's crisis management. There's in some cases regulatory notification, and costs that are directly attributed to the business that's affected by the breach. And that's the first party coverage, right? And every policy is going to have different things, business interruptions and option, extra expenses, those sorts of things that affect the business directly. And then there's the third party coverage, which is the if any of your clients or your customers' personal information is stolen and you're liable because the breach happened on your platforms, that's third party where any information that's stolen that creates a liability for you has coverage as well. And I shouldn't say any, but it's kind of in concept, whether it's first party or third party, whether it's a direct cost to the business or it's a liability cost because something bad happened to another person engaged with your business. And so that's kind of at a high level what's included, but there's a number of different smaller coverages. The hot button coverages you want to look for, things like funds transfer fraud, social engineering. You want to look for ransomware coverage. You can find policies that will address all of those things that we're seeing today.
So sorry, Jeff, can I interject? Just a point of
Yeah.
clarifications, because I know a lot of businesses now have hosted cloud applications or other
Mhm.
things. What if they have a breach and client information or patient information is compromised? What's my liability there as a
So
business
if
owner?
so if you're so if you're have cloud hosted applications or cloud hosted data and it's compromised, the vector is your user accounts. If it's a social engineering, like what happened with MGM last year or 2 years ago, where socially engineering a desktop tech was the vector into their services. That's still a liability. It's pretty rare. I mean, it does happen. The big breaches where you have what's one of the big ones that happened? Google had a huge breach, into their cloud hosted stuff. They're liable for that stuff. But if it comes from you, if your user accounts or you had a social engineering situation or a security situation that allowed the vector in from your side of the platform, then you can have some liability there.
Okay. Yeah. So we need to be aware of that. And
Yeah.
what about, you talked about social engineering and things like that.
Hmm.
So I mean, so there's an element of kind of human error
Hmm.
or a human component where that will help cover or potentially could help cover some of that those damages. Um, so tell me a little bit. I mean, because another big question is, I mean, how do we determine what's the right amount of coverage to get?
Oh, that's a loaded question. So the right amount of coverage is determined at the time of loss, which is my favorite saying. That's what the insurance adjusters are going to tell you. But some quick stats. The average funds transfer fraud is $200,000. That's average. Is a 200,000 erroneously transferred chunk of money, right?
So I accidentally, like, I mean, there was an incident where, an employee sent in an email, a
Mhm.
spoofed email. It wasn't really the employee, but it was spoofed, right?
Yep.
Sent in an email, hey, I changed my banks and here's my new
Yep.
banking for direct deposit. So that sort of thing.
Oh,
Or
you've
or
seen that
maybe
one,
a
have you?
vendor.
Yep. Yep. So that's the average is 200,000. We had someone in Hermiston actually several years ago. Probably should have anonymized that more. That their down payment for a house, their life savings, every penny they had in the bank, somebody got in the middle of the escrow process and socially engineered that deposit to go where it wasn't supposed to, and they were not able to get it back. It was super sad. So funds transfer fraud is a big one. The average cost of a data breach overall is $4.88 million in 2024. That's a statistic I found out there. Ransomware is another one. A 1.5 million is the average ransomware ask in. That's a dated figure for 2023. All of this stuff changes so fast that So looking at these averages, you got to weigh what your business can afford and what your exposure is, and you keep a lot of, if you're a one person shop that stores a bunch of HIPAA regulated information, you've got a different exposure, and that's a different regulatory response cost than somebody who's only a business to business and doesn't store payment information and only has contact info. It depends on what you're working in, and these are generalities. This is the average cost of a data breach being $4.9 million. Well, that's everywhere from, small business owner operator, sole proprietor, all the way up to, Google breach or Yahoo or, any of those. And so it's hard to narrow it down, and some, more detailed metrics around by business size tranche might be appropriate. But, a lot of policies start at the bottom end is typically about $1 million in coverage. And I did one. I quoted somebody that I was referred that needed, was it 10 million? It was a single or two employees. Their interior design, two employees, and they were providing some interior design elements for MGM. And after that data breach, MGM re-upped all of their contracts for any vendor to need 10 million of cyber coverage. And this person's an interior design, like they don't have any personal information. They're just ordering, decor, couches,
Wow.
furniture, and
Wow.
MGM required them to have 10 million of cyber. So it's all over the board. And you've got to, that's one of those that you probably should have the conversation with your agent or broker to figure out what's right for your business. Because 4.9 million average cost for data breach is a scary number.
Yeah, and
And
I just know through we've seen we see it pretty regularly, locally as well.
mhm,
And one of the questions we get asked frequently too is will insurance pay for ransom? The ransom,
mhm,
ask, and then what's what's that look like, and how does that occur, and
yeah, you can get coverage for ransomware. In some cases, that coverage can be excluded if you disclose that coverage anywhere. So, they're trying to prevent a situation where it's public knowledge that your company has $1 million in ransomware coverage, so that if you have a compromise, somebody asks for, oh, look at that, exactly $1 million. That's weird.
so you want to,
Yeah,
yeah, so you want to have it, but you don't want to tell anybody.
exactly. So in some cases can be excluded. So, you can get ransomware coverage. In again, every policy is different. So in some cases, that's a reimbursable expense. So you got to pay the ransomware, get your stuff unlocked, and your insurance company will reimburse. So yeah, you can get those coverages.
What are some of the typical exclusions or limitations that you see in the policies, in general policies around
One,
cyber insurance?
that's a great question. So a lot of the exclusions deal with things that other policies would respond to. Like physical, uh, bodily injury, physical damage of different things, right? So that's going to be part of your commercial general liability typically. And so you're going to see some of those. The other one, my favorite, is a war exclusion. There's a lot of war and terrorism exclusions, but as you guys are no doubt aware, we've got some foreign actors out there that are actively trying to undermine different aspects of the U.S. infrastructure. And so, there's the hottest industries to be targeted by ransomware are, healthcare, critical manufacturing, government, IT companies, financial services. Hey, that's insurance, things like that. And so, if you got foreign actors out there that are looking to either scrape data or just overtly disrupt what's happening in the U.S., that war and terrorism exclusion can also come to bear too. The good news is with the war and terrorism one, in some cases you can buy that back and have coverage there, but by default it's typically excluded.
Yeah.
I had a question to add in there too.
Mm.
What about in exclusions? What about negligence? If we aren't patching our workstations and we knowingly aren't patching our workstations, am I going to be subject to co-insurance? Am I going to be subject to exclusion from policy?
Yep, and most liability policies, whether it's general liability, auto, or cyber, a pretty common exclusion is basically revolves around if a reasonable person would expect this loss to occur, it would be excluded. And that's a little bit subjective. And there's some tort law that I don't really want to get into that protects. It weighs heavier on a burden of proof of the insurance company than the consumer to get that exclusion to stick. But there's, negligence is excluded under that if a reasonable person, if you have no firewall and you're publishing your public facing IP address out there on, nefarious websites, like that's going to be a problem and it's going to get excluded. But, if it's hey, we didn't notice that this patching mechanism wasn't operating for the last 3 months and one of the vectors was an unpatched firmware that, whatever, like that's not negligence. That's a reasonable person isn't going to go and say like, you should have checked every single update process. That's not reasonable. So,
so we have to prove due care that we actually tried to do this.
And this is, a plug for Teknologize, just for you guys out there. You're probably a lot of your Teknologize customers, but, just a short detour here. One of the agencies we acquired was a Teknologize customer, and we have a corporate IT team, and I was responsible for the integration part and worked with Teknologize. They've got a great tech stack, by the way, you guys. This is me outside with nothing to, I'm no horse in this fight. I had to pull a customer away from them, unfortunately, but Teknologize has a great tech stack. And this is a plea to engage with your managed service provider to do everything you can to make sure your stuff is, you take the recommendations, buy the services, because you can hopefully avoid any sort of situation like this. But if you are negligent, just don't do any updates. Don't, have consumer grade hardware on your networks and whatever. It's not, that's getting closer to the, a reasonable person could expect a loss to occur there.
Okay. Jeff, here's another question that you and I, that we kind of had an exchange in email a little bit that stood out to me. Kind of what you had called out was, what's important for them to really understand about their policies. So they have cyber insurance. What is it important? What's critical for them to understand? What do they need to know about their policy?
Great question. So again, we got to talk in generalities. There's coverage for business interruption and extra expense. That's one that a lot of people don't understand, is that if your business is disrupted, you can work with an adjuster to calculate the amount of revenue that was disrupted, and there can be some coverage for that. For revenue disruption, if you have to spend some extra money on any part of the response that's out of pocket right now needs that prevent further loss from occurring, those are extra expenses. You can get reimbursed for that. And also making sure that all of the hot button kind of breach mechanisms that are for your industry, make sure you have coverage for ransomware. Make sure you have coverage for funds transfer fraud, social engineering, and make sure that all these things are part of your policy. But I guess the biggest thing, the number one thing to make sure, if you don't have a standalone cyber policy and you have, a commercial general liability that has the little $50,000 or $100,000 limit on it for cyber, that's not enough. That does not work anymore. Those days are long gone. So if you don't have a standalone cyber and you think you've got coverage on your commercial general liability, you don't. So, I mean, I can tell you.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Jeff, because that's something we often get is we added it to our general policy, and we checked the box or something to add cyber, and there's that false impression that, okay, we've got all this coverage when really they don't.
That's enough coverage for you to determine that a breach wasn't a breach, and that's it. Because that, I probably shouldn't admit this, but week 3 at the agency I'm at, prior to it being Highstreet, got hired to do desktop support. Week 3, we had an incident, and thank God we had a cyber policy because the lawyer fees to just get, and they had a breach response expert called up. He was my point person. It was awesome. But I'll tell you, I think just the remediation and lawyer fee was $50,000 to find out that we didn't breach any personal identifiable information, and had no regulatory response, and we didn't have any meaningful liability to anybody. was 50 grand. So that's what I mean by a breach that wasn't a breach. I mean, there was unauthorized access to our systems, and it had been for a while, but nothing, we caught it and nothing really terrible happened. And it was still 50 grand. So so if something terrible happens, now we're getting up to the, average cost of a breach is $4.88 million. And so your 50 or 100,000 on your business owner's policy or commercial general liability is just not going to be it. And also that's
So I've got,
dated. That's dated. That was $50,000 in 2018.
yeah, that's a bit ago in tech time. A couple questions here now that, I guess, what happens if you suspect a breach? What's the process? I mean, how do you engage? When do we call, or how do we contact our insurance agent? I mean, what do we do?
Oh man, that's a great question. So the most policies include, like I just mentioned, somebody who's your point person to coordinate every aspect of this breach. And so your policy will have a response center, a 24-hour call hotline that you can get a hold of. And that is your first call.
What's the timing on that? When should I call my IT company first and then have them dig into that? Or what do we do?
Those are, again, a great question. I think, if you guys are working with somebody like Teknologize, it's utilize their services to find out if a breach occurred. Again, we didn't have that. It was me. It was just me. And so my first call was the breach response hotline for the carrier, the insurance company. But it just depends on the situation. If you guys should be, if you're a customer of Teknologize, I'm sure you're in lockstep with them on every aspect of your security. And so that's going to be a hand in hand. Maybe you'll both be on the call to the hotline, but I would definitely engage your MSP if it's not Teknologize, or if it is, then Dan's your guy, I think.
Well, I think from an incident response standpoint, you protect the asset, you protect the business first. So if you can stop the bleeding, stop the bleeding. Prevent the breach, turn off the, whatever you need to do to stop whatever breach was occurring, and then shortly thereafter, or at the same time, whoever is designated to reach out to insurance or legal does that at that moment. So, and if there's been a breach, for instance, you transferred $100,000, obviously immediately call your insurance broker or whomever is listed in your policy to call. Typically, as Jeff said, those policies have a specific incident response center that's going to receive that call 24 hours a day, and they're going to kind of make the communications internally to your broker. You can obviously reach out to your insurance agent as well, but I don't know if you're going to reach them at 2 a.m. when these things usually happen. So it's a little bit of it's also situational, but we always protect the asset first. So if we can stop the bleeding, we can stop whatever incident is occurring. If it's data exfiltration, if it's somebody sending malicious emails, stop it, and at the same time make that call.
And the sooner you can get the insurance company started on a claim, the more help they're going to be able to provide. And it will be a hand in hand, with Dan and team at Teknologize. And so for sure, stop it from happening and get your insurance company on the phone as quick as you can.
How is insurance and cyber insurance how is cyber insurance influencing our actions on cybersecurity in this day and age?
Oh man, that's a big question. I think awareness is probably the biggest thing. The idea or they talk about ransomware and the social engineering. These were just not topics of conversation really 10 years ago. And so I think cyber insurance is helping to define some of these things and to kind of standardize how, again, from the insurance side, how do we define and categorize them so that the insurance company can help with a claim? And I think there's an awareness piece of that. And it's when you hear about the big breaches, my favorite was the MGM one to talk about. It got a lot of people on board with realizing the need for cyber insurance. That was I think if I remember correctly, they had a $40 million cyber policy, pegged the policy limits. They lost $2 billion of market cap. And so like, that's a big ouch, right? And it was all over the news. If you were in Vegas and couldn't check into your hotel or your room key didn't work, like, I think, when we have these big events, people, it's kind of a trigger in your brain that's like, oh, if that happened to my business, even if it's on a smaller scale, what would happen? Like, how would I deal with that? Or how would I pay for that? And so I think, it's twofold on awareness and also helping to define and categorize some of these losses that we can talk about in a common language.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit more about what are the common missteps that we see in the industry. And Dan, Jeff, maybe I'll open this up to both of you. What are some of the common missteps, pitfalls that really jeopardize either their cybersecurity position or when responding to an event?
I'd love to hear Dan go first on this one.
Well, from an incident response standpoint, I think that stop the bleeding is a double-edged sword. You stop the bleeding, you might damage something, and you might damage logs.
Clarify, stop the bleeding. Maybe clarify bleeding.
So an incident occurs, and you want to stop it from continuing to occur. So if you are sending out mass phishing emails, you want to stop that, right? For reputational purposes, for just good business hygiene purposes. If you have ransomware that is executing across your environment, you want to stop it. You want to make sure that there's no data exfiltration. So you start blocking things at the firewall level. You stop turning on servers off. So I think, but one of the main things that occurs that is probably from a forensic standpoint a misstep in any incident response is turning off the machine. We all think, oh no, something's going wrong. Let me pull the power cord on the workstation or the server or whatever. And that's a major misstep. A lot of the data is actually stored in RAM. And as soon as you turn that machine off, it's gone. There's been plenty of incidents where a forensic examiner can go in and look at an image of the RAM and actually go get the encryption key, which is also the decryption key. It's symmetric encryption. And so they can actually go get the key from RAM because it hadn't been flushed out of the memory yet. And so I think a big part of it is make sure you engage, if an incident does occur, you engage the appropriate parties right away. And, from an insurance standpoint, when you reach out to that incident response center or that phone number, they're going to assign you somebody immediately who's going to be able to advise you in that, even if it's 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. They're going to tell you, don't reboot it. We're going to start doing this. We start with this. Maybe we turn off the internet. Maybe we unplug our internet connection, but we don't unplug anything else. Ransomware is very fast. It will propagate throughout a network in minutes. You could say seconds, but really minutes. Within the course of 20, 30 minutes, 40, 50, 60 computer network will be completely encrypted. So it really is pretty quick, especially when you think about the timelines. This is occurring at 2 a.m., at 3 a.m. when nobody's watching, when nobody's logging into servers. So it really, before you know it, it's already complete. So really, you shutting off that server doesn't stop the bleeding. It really just makes it harder to find out what happened and maybe gives you that small chance that you can recover a little bit of forensic evidence that may help you if you're going to go after an actor for prosecution if they're in the United States, or if you're going to try to make sure you have a forensic image if you have to do regulatory reporting or you have any compliance or acknowledgement that you need to follow. So there's definitely a lot there, and those happen early on in the process. Typically, you make those mistakes immediately, and those are mistakes that can be tough to recover from, and you might even damage some data that could have helped you in the process.
Well said. I think one of the biggest missteps you can do is panic, number one. And number two, is a great example of phishing emails being sent without authorization. Start responding to all of them, and saying, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do this, whatever the response is. Because a lot of your cyber policies include a public relations coverage to help, with the shape the narrative, because we're all in, I'm in Hermiston. It's a 20,000 people here. If something affects, we've got our agency serves probably half of the people in Hermiston in some way or another. That can be a huge reputation hit. And so navigating that and just trying to, send a mass email from, our client management system, send a mass email, hey, we were affected by a data breach. We're sorry your info got out there. Well, that could create some liability, right? That if you're assuming liability for it and putting forth a narrative that's not helpful in the situation, that can be an inappropriate response, or it can also cause issues with how coverage is applied. So, that's why we want to get the insurance company on board with your breach response as quick as possible to help with that part too.
Yeah, and I, that's where it's vital, and we've told a lot of, we tell everybody that it's critical to have a basic incident response plan in place, right? And big part of that is communications to clients, communications to public, kind of having that drafted out in advance and a little bit standardized so the messaging can be controlled or at least appropriate, right? And like you said, we got to engage with the insurance company and make sure that any messaging doesn't put the response at risk or the policy or claims at risk either. So, we're open. We want to be transparent. We want to be open. We want to be, especially in small communities. A lot of people we know they're our friends, but we do have to follow a specific kind of protocol around that as well. So,
in some cases, a response with too much information can help the threat actor further what they're trying to do. And so if you put too much out there, you can give them another ledge to stand on.
So, what's the? I know a question we get pretty regular too was cybersecurity costs, insurance costs. Where any idea for anybody that doesn't know? What to expect in paying on cost for cyber insurance?
That's a hard one to answer, but we can start out with, for a small business with $1 million of coverage, you can probably get in the neighborhood of, $1,200 to $1,500 for a minimum premium policy. But it really is heavily dependent on, how many employees you've got, what your company revenue is, what industry you're in, what coverages you're looking for. So there's so many of those sorts of things that influence the price. And honestly, it's less than you'd think. You don't get huge discounts for having an awesome MSP like Teknologize, which is unfortunate. But most of it, the pricing is just based on the scale of your business. And so you can expect to start at $1,200 to $1,500, up to, I think the one I told you about with a single employee, 10 million of coverage. That was actually 3 different policies layered. That one, I think the quote came in at 17,000 for 10 million of cyber coverage.
Okay. So what about, there's, I guess the question I have is, if I get cyber insurance, I think of auto insurance almost, right? And maybe it's not good, but, there's a lot of companies out there that offer auto insurance. Is it the same with cyber insurance right now, or what should I expect going in looking for coverage?
All right, here's my pitch for the independent channel of insurance. So you've got captive insurance, right? Think like a State Farm for home and auto. State Farm, they sell State Farm insurance and that's it, right? Nothing against them. It's just a different business model than what we do. We're an independent brokerage. And part of my job is keeping our different insurance companies happy and maintaining compliance. And we've got 200 and some odd insurance companies we represent. And so your best bet, honestly, is to go to an independent brokerage that specializes in commercial insurance. This is one of those that you may not want to try to do on your own through an online portal or whatever. But you're going to want to talk to somebody who specializes in it because, back to what I first said about cyber's the Wild West and every company has different policies and they're all different. Get somebody who knows what companies offer what coverages and are going to be the best fit for your business, because we have lots of options. We've got probably 10 or 12 different companies that'll do cyber, and they all have different products. And so Just got to give a shout out to my colleague Josh Hansen. He's the guy you want to talk to from Highstreet. I'm just saying. Josh Hansen will be able to navigate that. He knows those companies. He's a specialist in commercial insurance, and he's going to know what to do. So you got to find yourself somebody like that that's going to be able to put you with the right company with the right coverages for your situation. And that's the beauty of the independent channel, because you're not locked into just one single, like you are with if State Farm or Allstate, or I don't know if you guys have oh man, I can't remember the name of it. There's another one that's a business, a specialty business, captive that we run into occasionally. So, options are good.
So just another question that I see. You can tell me if I'm right or wrong, but I've seen. Well, a lot of us have seen a lot of breaches and hacks in the news, and I'm wondering about the cost of cyber insurance impacting that, as well as I've also heard that some insurance companies are completely dropping cyber coverage. Have you seen any of that or the impact of that in the industry?
So, I mean, first of all, the cost of cyber. Basically, the fundamentals of insurance, right? When something bad happens, who do you want to pay for it? Do you want to pay for it, or do you want somebody else to pay for it? And so it's risk transference, right? You've got to assess for your business if you want to be on the hook for that $4.8 million data breach, or do you want somebody else to pay it, right? Chances are really low, but the other side of it is the amount of cybercrime that's actually prosecuted in the US is like 0.05%. So if somebody does defraud you in some way, shape, or form via cyber, there is basically no chance they're going to have any legal, criminal action against them. So that said, we're actually seeing a growth in the amount of companies that are in the independent space. I don't know, I can't speak to the captive part, but we've got more and more companies coming to market with a cyber product. We've vetted several of them. We got some specialty companies that we work with that have kind of unique ways of approaching it. Some of those include, some kind of monitoring software, or they have some simplified underwriting where they can do, there's a bunch of different variations on it. But we're actually seeing a growth in that and some innovation in cyber insurance products that are kind of cool. The other thing to consider is that, there's also crime coverage that you might want to look at for your business, because they're, the hand in hand of cyber liability and crime coverage is a pretty good risk transference strategy to not have to pay for something if it goes sideways, if things go bad. So.
Great. Well, we only have a few more minutes left, and I wanted to open it up. I mean, is there anything, Jeff or Dan, that you had that that was important for you to mention or bring up today around cyber insurance?
I had one more question here too. What about, a lot of, depending on what industry we're in or which, business units we work with, we might have regulatory fines or penalties. Does insurance help with those if those do occur? If we have insurance for that covered loss, is that covered if there's a fine or a penalty for not reporting or for not securing the data or data loss?
You can find some coverage for that, yes. That's, again, read the policies very carefully. What typically, most policies are going to provide legal counsel for, do you disclose this to the FCC or the FTC or whoever it may be? Do you need to, the regulatory response as far as the, was data that's categorized as necessary to report get exfiltrated, and how do you go about doing that? And there is coverage for, if you follow those steps and follow the recommendations, you can find coverage on some policies for the regulatory costs.
Okay.
That's a good question. All right, let's. So I've got another question as well. What? I mean, are there? I mean, because we've gone through so many different cybersecurity insurance applications. They differ so much, and over the years they've gotten more granular, right? What what are some of the high level things that we should be doing in preparation for, when I say we, just general business owners in preparation for applying for cyber coverage, and what are the expectations?
I guess the biggest thing would be have your MSP help you with the application. There's a lot of technical, again, in some cases, there could be a lot of technical questions on there about incident response, about, multi-factor authentication, and how do you access different aspects of your software. What do you have for, on-premise security, physical security? What do you have for cloud? There's some pretty technical questions on some of the applications. And to get those right, it's probably good to have your IT service provider involved with the application process.
What if I did it myself and didn't include IT, or whether me or the IT inadvertently answered something wrong? We thought we had this or didn't have this or whatever, and what happens then if it's clearly wrong and something happens?
It depends on if it can be proved that it was intentional or not. The signature at the bottom of the paper says that you certify in a test that all of the information is true, right? The underwriting, the insurance underwriting, you have to, warrant and guarantee that it's all true. And so if it comes to light that you were intentionally dishonest, there's the big F word is potential fraud, depending on what it is. If it's inadvertent, sometimes we see policies flat canceled, back to the inception and things like that. Depending on how material the misinformation is. I mean, it's
Okay.
it depends. It's not good. None of them end up in a good scenario. Let's just go with that. And so that's again,
So
why
accuracy is important there, just in.
yes.
Okay.
I
All right.
think
And I'm not trying to.
another piece to that too is to make sure it doesn't change. And if it does change, that you report that, and while it may not be important that you went from Sophos to Barracuda, it may not be important to you, to the business. It might be important to your agent or to the underwriter of the policy. So if you do make an organizational change on security, even if it's an improvement, make sure it's notated somewhere. It may not require, it may not trigger some full new application. It may just be your agent or your broker puts it in a file just so that they know. That way, when it does if you ever have a claim against it, you can have that paper trail.
That's a very good point. And in a lot of cases, these policies, when they renew, there's a renewal questionnaire. Are there any changes? Did anything happen? So it's I can't tell you guys how important it is to make sure you have a good working relationship with your IT service provider and your insurance agent. You can head off a lot of problems by maintaining contact, communication, and good relationship there with both of those services that you need as a business.
Well, and I like that statement, Jeff, and let me add to that as well as we wrap up here, because we're at time, is that I think it's important for business owners to have not only a good relationship, but a fundamental understanding of both their coverage and policies and their cyber technical controls or security there. And you don't have to be, and what I tell folks is you don't have to be super technical to understand a lot of the fundamentals there, and knowing that what you have, what you don't have, both on the insurance side and the IT side. Because when it comes to insurance, I'm not the expert, and there's a lot that I don't know, but there are some things that from a high level as a business owner, I can understand that will help reduce my risk as an owner. So thank you, Jeff, for joining us today. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Dan, for your contribution as well. We hope everybody found this conversation insightful and helpful. As Jeff mentioned earlier, if there's anybody that has questions on insurance, he does have a contact over there, Josh Hansen. We can include that in a post-email follow-up with his contact information. And then if anybody has questions around where their technology aligns with their insurance coverage, obviously we're happy to help review that with you, review applications or policies as well. Heck, I'd rather do it now instead of after the fact. and figuring it out during an event. I mean, it's so much more stressful at that time. And so we will be posting this online. It's going to YouTube, as well as we'll be sending an email to everybody, as mentioned, with a link to the recording. And if there's any other further questions, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you again for joining us today, and hope to see you again soon. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Byron.